Chapter 10, June 23rd, 2158, 1457. Widow System, en route to the Citadel. I stood once again next to Commander Ryder and Anita Goyle on the bridge of the SSV Constantinople, this time to watch our arrival in the Widow System. I was glad that we would finally arrive. To call the last 5 days uneventful would be an understatement. You can go over the same information only so often before you get mad. And cut off from our communication network, we couldn't even get any updates from home. Even making plans with Anita on how to approach certain subjects when talking to the council was finished in a day. Refining them took only one more. However, without knowing the exact intentions of the council, that was all we could do. In the end, those plans were just ideas on how we could achieve our goals, and their definition was somewhat fluid. For example, one of the subjects we wanted to discuss with the council was the presence of alien ships on the other side of the relay. After the ceasefire, we never sent any ships through it, and our probes couldn't give us an accurate picture of what was happening on the other side. So while it wasn't a great shock that there were military spaceships, it still made us uncomfortable, especially since more than half of them belonged to the Turians. The best outcome we could think of was that we convinced the council to withdraw all ships, but we knew that this would probably not happen. The tensions were still high, so shortly after the end of the conflict, and nobody was willing to let their guard down just yet. For now, we wanted to prevent that even more ships gathered on the other side of the relay. Furthermore, we wanted to try that if there had to be a fleet close, that the Asari and Salarians at least outnumbered the Turians to reduce possible aggressions between our species. Basically, our objectives were split into 3 possible outcomes: the best, the worst, and somewhere in between. Of course, we would still try to get the in-between closer to the best than the worst, but everything could happen at the talks. We would take what we could get and work around everything else. As I looked around the bridge, my eyes met with those of Chief Petty Officer James Tagg, who greeted me with a nod that I quickly returned. James Tagg was someone I had met 2 days ago as I wandered the Constantinople's hallways in boredom. He invited me to a game of cards with some of the other enlisted soldiers currently off duty. With nothing better to do, I decided to join them, and it was probably one of the best decisions I had made on the trip to the Citadel. Not only was it a way to relieve me of my boredom, but the soldiers were a wonderful source of information and ideas. At first, they were hesitant to talk to me because I was apparently one of the big guys. Just like Ryder had told me, my name was known to the soldiers of all ranks, but after a few rounds, they opened up to me. Their job was to provide security and defend the ship in case of enemies trying to board. They had the necessary experience to notice small annoyances during training exercises that could potentially become dangerous. While their issued guns were working fine, they had no means to lay down suppressive fire to allow their comrades to change cover safely. The only weapon that currently had the rate of fire to do that were rifles, and those were not an option on a ship. In addition to being unwieldy in the narrow hallways, you had to have a hand free in case the artificial gravity was suddenly disabled to hold on to something. Nothing is more dangerous than floating without control in a firefight. When I tossed in the idea of a designated submachine gun for the security personnel on ships, they were immediately hooked, adding their own ideas of what the guns should be able to do. The next day, I walked all over the ship to talk to different crew members and spoke with them about their jobs and what they thought could be improved. Every single idea or complaint was put down in a small notebook that I carried with me. I even talked to Ryder and Anderson about their experience with the provided gear. After all, they participated in the ground operation on Shaanxi and had some things to say about it. "Exiting FTL in 10, called one of the bridge officers and brought me out of my thoughts. I stood there with my arms crossed, watching the blue waves and elongated stars of FTL travel. It may have been just 5 seconds, but it felt much longer than that, and with a blink, the view changed. The obvious signs of FTL were gone, and its place was a light purple nebula. The whole bridge window was filled out by it, and I couldn't decide if we were in it or if it was far away from us. While I was still admiring the nebula, 2 frigates appeared in our field of view and answered my question. We were already in the nebula, but from the fact that we still could see the ships, I could infer that it wasn't as dense as thought. It only seemed that way because of the sheer volume of the nebula. "Captain, the Ameris is hailing us," the communications officer Deborah Glasgow said, and looked at Captain Peterson expectantly. "Patch them trough," was her answer, and she straightened her uniform almost subconsciously. Not that it mattered, our systems could only transmit audio at this moment because the differences in our respective hardware didn't allow for video transmission, something which would change with technological advancement. "Captain Peterson," rang the voice of an Asari over the speakers. It was the captain of the ARV Amaris, Onea Ibaris. While we traveled 5 days together, the contact between our ships had been minimal and limited itself to the exchange of navigational data. Contact with the Turian frigate had even been non-existent, besides an introduction by the Turian captain. I suspected they were under orders to do so by the Council to keep us from gathering more information. "We've cleared a path together with Citadel Flight Control for you and your escorts. Please stay on it. The airspace around the Citadel can be quite crowded, and accidents are known to happen," said Captain Ibaris. "What about your ships? Will they continue to escort us?" asked Captain Peterson in return, while checking a data pad that an officer held out for her. "No, we will not. Our orders are to join up with the rest of the Citadel Defense Fleet. This is the end of our journey together. We hope you will enjoy your time here on the Citadel. Ibaris out." And with that, the line went dead without giving us a chance to respond. "That was quite rude, don't you think?" muttered Anita quietly, so that only Ryder and I heard what she said. "I think they are just annoyed at how long it took. Look, they are accelerating into the nebula. Their engines seem to be a lot faster than ours, and I guess their mass effect cores are strong enough that the journey here would have taken them only 2 days if we hadn't slowed them down," explained Ryder, his eyes never leaving the windows, as if he was afraid to miss anything. "Flight path confirmed, Captain. Adjusting our trajectory now," called the pilot of the SSV Constantinople. "Good. Bring us in, Lieutenant. I finally want to see this vaunted citadel." And she did, just like the rest of us. At first, it had been a shadow behind a denser portion of the nebula, but as we flew through it, its magnificence was shown to us. Truly, there was no better word than magnificent to describe the citadel. I still remember the scene in the first Mass Effect game when you see the citadel for the first time. Then I thought, wow, what a cool space station. But now I was too stunned by the view to think of anything. To describe what I felt at that moment would have been an effort in futility. I felt wonder, fear, and excitement rush through me, and some emotions I couldn't even put in words. "Holy shit!" called someone, and for the first time I noticed how quiet it got on the bridge. Every head was turned towards the front window to get a look at the citadel. The only person to continue working was the pilot, probably to get us closer, to get a better look at it. With every minute passing, the station got bigger and bigger. Seeing it on a small screen couldn't do it justice. Only in real life, you understood how massive the citadel was. I knew that the citadel was just around 40 kilometers long, or perhaps a bit more, but for me, its arms stretched on forever. For a moment, I tore my eye away from this beautiful sight, to look at Anita and Ryder to see their reactions. Their eyes were wide open in wonder, and Anita's mouth too, to a small degree. But what made me stop for a moment was the full-blown smile on Ryder's face. He was completely relaxed, as if there was nothing but him, the view, and the moment. I turned back to appreciate the sight some more before the seriousness of our situation returned to our minds. After a few more minutes, we got close enough to watch the in- and outcoming traffic around the citadel. Hundreds of ships were coming and going. The closest comparison that came to my mind was of a busy beehive. "How many ships are there?" asked Anita, not turning away even for a second. "Hundreds," answered Ryder, "spread over all 5 arms and probably that ring back there too. It wouldn't surprise me if the daily traffic is somewhere around the lower to mid-thousands per day," I commented, giving the two a side glance. Ryder was the first one who turned towards me and asked, "Lower thousands? Why that number?" And Anita turned shortly after, interested in my answer as well. "It reminds me a bit of a situation I've read about. It happened on Earth not long after World War II. The city of Berlin was divided into 2 parts, the east belonging to the Soviets and the west belonging to the Western Allies. In 1948, I think, there was a blockade going on. No supplies could get into the western part of the city, no food, no fuel, no medicine. The only way into the city was by air, and so they did it that way. In over a year, they transported around 2.3 million tons of supplies, among them 500,000 tons worth of food, into the city by air. Interesting history lesson, but you still didn't tell us how you came to your estimation. Anita interrupted before I could delve deeper into the topic. I bit back a barbed remark. Oh, how I hated to be interrupted, and continued to explain. It's just that they flew around 280.000 times during that time to provide enough supplies to near 2.2 million people. That's approximately 700 flights per day. I took a short break to let the information I dumped on them settle before pointing at the Citadel. Now, where do you think this space station gets its supplies from? I don't think they have a lot of places for farms and the like. So they get them by spaceships, a lot of spaceships, because I don't think that the population on the Citadel is just a measly 2.2 million. 5 times that, I guess. And that is to keep the station going. There will be even more flights bringing in other goods, like what we define as normal goods and materials for production and construction. Also, we should not forget that every high society needs luxury goods. How else should the rich and famous show off? As I continued talking, I didn't notice how my audience grew to encompass most of the bridge. If we also take into account that not only merchant vessels go in and out of the system, but also privately owned vessels, for example, public transportation between star systems, and military vessels as well, then my first estimation of low to mid-thousands was way off. It's probably around low to mid-10,000 per day. When I finished, I noticed how many people listened to my explanation. Some of them were even gaping slightly at me. If it was my knowledge of times long past or the number of ships that made them do so, I didn't know. I didn't know you were so well versed in 20th century history, commented Anita with a raised eyebrow. I shrugged and replied, it's just something I found interesting. To me, our history is comparable to a long list of successes, failures, and examples. Most things already happened once or twice, just in slightly different forms. The only thing you have to do is to adapt them to the circumstances before you. A good advice, Mr. Dennebrun, concurred Captain Peterson before she turned to her crew. I just wish my crew would remember our circumstances right now and do their jobs instead of gawking holes into the air, said Peterson. Her tone had gotten colder and more strict with every word, and as if the crew was showered with ice-cold water, they went back to work as fast as they could. I held back a chuckle at this scene while Ryder just looked on amused. He turned towards Anita and me and said, Mrs. Goyle, Mr. Dennebrun, I advise we should make our way to the shuttle base shortly. My team is already there and preparing everything for our departure. You probably want to stay for a moment longer, called Captain Peterson before either Anita or I could respond. Our flight path seems to bring us pretty close to their flagship, or at least the biggest ship that's currently in the system. That comment stopped any intention to leave the bridge, and indeed, as I looked back out of the window, I saw how we got closer to an Asari dreadnought. At first I believed that it was just one of the few which were stationed at the Citadel, but as we got closer, I noticed that it was larger than the others. An obvious power play from the Council, scoffed Anita. Our escorts must have sent word ahead of our ship's new capabilities, and that is their answer. Do what you want. We still got enough firepower to crush you. Or they plan to do that from the start, to show us how much more advanced they are, deemed Ryder. What I'm interested in is what this ship's numbers are. Did you make any scans of that ship? His last question was directed at Captain Peterson, who looked over to her sensor officer. The sensor officer tapped a few buttons on his console before standing up with a datapad in hand. With quick strides, he walked over and handed Peterson the datapad. Not a single word came over his lips as he saluted, then turned around to go back to his post. Peterson glanced over the displayed information, her left eyebrow rising marginally before she looked up to answer Ryder. We've not directed any active scans at the ship, but even our passive scanners are picking up an enormous ESO core. And what got on its size, well, it's around 1.6 kilometers on every axis. That is a big ship, commented Ryder dryly. What are you thinking about, Oscar? Asked Anita when she saw me studying the Destiny Ascension. 15 to 20 was the only thing I said as I kept watching the Destiny Ascension. 15 to 20 what? Years until we have something comparable in our fleet, I answered with a sharp grin. Anita's eyes widened at my proclamation, and a barely audible stutter sneaked into her voice as she inquired, "Are you sure? That seems like a too short time for something like that." "You forget the 2 big kids back home," I said with a chuckle. "Ah, yes, I see what you mean. When Wright and Dr. Hoshiume get to know about the ship, they want toys like that. Or even bigger ones." "Correct. And if I know Takahashi, he wants the bigger one. He will not stop until he has designed and constructed the largest ship in the galaxy. He can be petty like that." "As much as I would like to hear more about Dr. Hoshiume's pettiness," interrupted Ryder, "but we really should make our way to the shuttle bay." "You're right, Commander. Come, Oscar." "We still have to suit up," stated Anita, which sounded more like an order to me. With one last look over my shoulder at the Destiny Ascension, which appeared even more massive with the seemingly smaller citadel in the background, I followed Anita and Ryder off the bridge. We went through the halls unimpeded by the crew members that were also on the move. After a few minutes and a thankfully short elevator ride, we arrived in the designated shuttle bay for us diplomats. Waiting for us were Anderson and 4 more soldiers. All of them were in full combat gear with sealed helmets on. One thing stood out about them. Every single one of them had the with red stripe on their right arm and the N7 logo on their chest plates. They were part of humanity's best soldiers, and they were here to protect Anita and me. It had been Wright who had vehemently insisted on this, and his reasoning had been absolutely sound. Even if the Council and the other associated governments wanted us no harm, something that we probably wouldn't survive with an army backing us, there were still those that acted on their own. There only had to be one guy with a gun and a grudge, and all could go to hell. At the moment, they were all standing at attention, giving us a crisp salute. Anderson was standing at the left side of the row, 1/2 step ahead of the others. "Preparations are finished, Commander. Our squad is good to go," announced Anderson to Ryder, not wavering even the slightest in his position. Ryder gave a sharp salute back and said, "At ease. The diplomats still have to be outfitted. Anderson, you take Dennebrand. Rollins, you take Goyle. Get to it. The rest of you, get in the Pelican and buckle up. We're leaving soon." Not a second after he finished, the squad followed his orders. Anderson and another N7 soldier, clearly a woman by the cut of her armor, came towards us. They showed us to a workbench nearby, where 2 bulky vests lay. At a glance, they looked like old-style bulletproof vests. But that couldn't be further from the truth. They were a pair of the very first personal kinetic barriers that we've developed. While they were nothing like the streamlined version the Turians used, they got the job done, even if the shield broke just after 2 or 3 shots. After all, our N7 bodyguards would cover us the moment we came under attack, and for that, every extra second was better than nothing. So I got my suit jacket off and let Anderson help me put the vest on. The moment it closed around my body, a soft humming could be heard as the internal batteries started up. After a few seconds, I felt a tingle crawling over my skin before a blue light flashed in front of my vision and disappeared as fast as it appeared. The tingling persisted, but I could and would ignore it for the time being, especially since nobody else seemed uncomfortable with it. Anderson checked again if the vest sat well and the readings were within the parameters. He nodded more to himself than me and said, "Everything looks fine, Mr. Dennebrand. The shield generator is up and running and should even stop a bullet from an assault rifle. The atmosphere on the Citadel should be breathable, but a breath mask has been placed in the shuttle for both you and Mrs. Goyle. I request that you wear one merely to be sure that you don't breathe in any alien pathogens." "I will, don't worry. Anything else I should know?" I asked while I put my jacket back on, but not before I secured a small package to my vest, one that would hopefully help us in making a good impression. "Only a few things, sir," said Anderson and pointed at 2 of his squad members. "While we're on the Citadel, Commander Ryder and I are responsible for Mrs. Goyle's and your security. I lead the team that is responsible for your safety in particular. With me are the 2nd Lieutenants Ambrose and Fillion. We will probably stay a few days on the Citadel, so wherever you go, we follow. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask, Mr. Dennebrand." With a shake of my head, I answered, "Not for the moment, Lieutenant Anderson. We should take our seats. Don't want to miss the start, do we? The other team had already entered the Pelican through its back ramp, so seeing no reason to delay, I went into it as well. Second Lieutenant Ambrose was just a step ahead of me and took the furthest seat from the entrance on the right side of the aisle that led to the cockpit. She directed me to take the place to her left, and not a second after I sat down, Anderson appeared to my left, boxing me between two N7 soldiers. Fillion took a seat closer to the back ramp so that he could exit the Pelican before the rest of us. A quick glance confirmed that Anita's security detail had positioned themselves in the same manner around her. The moment everyone was belt up in their seats, the ramp closed shut, and a shudder went through the Pelican as its engine started. The voice of the pilot echoed through the room with the announcement that they had been given green light for their approach to the Citadel. Nobody spoke as the Pelican lifted itself off the ground and flew through the kinetic barrier that shielded the hangar from the outer atmosphere. In fact, the whole ride was quiet. Not even a single joke or quip came from anybody. The first word spoken after the long silence came from Commander Ryder when he ordered Fillion and Potshek to get ready, just as the Pelican set down on a landing pad. The ramp lowered itself, and the second it touched the ground, the two N7 soldiers jumped off their seats and walked calmly, but still swiftly out of the Pelican. Their rifles were held in a non-threatening position that allowed them to react to any danger immediately. After a few seconds, Ryder held his left hand to his head and nodded once. Then he looked at Anita and said, "The surroundings are safe. There are some armed forces, wearing a blue and black uniform, mixed species. I guess they sent some extra security from the CSEC for us, and one Asari wearing some kind of dress, probably a guide." "Thank you, Commander Ryder," responded Anita, her voice full of confidence. "They have waited enough. So let's go and begin the show." One after the other left the Pelican, and I got my first view of the Citadel up close, or at least of one of its landing pads. The location was close to the Citadel Tower, where the Council resided. When we came closer to the group of CSEC officers, the Asari in the dress stepped forward and addressed our group. "Welcome to the Citadel, dignitaries of humanity. My name is RelevantKitty, and I shall guide you to your meeting with the esteemed Citadel Council. We still have some time before the Council is ready to receive you. Would you like a short tour through the Presidium?" While she worded it like an offer, Anita and I knew that it wasn't one we could refuse. And so Anita accepted the tour on our behalf. The CSEC officers spread around our group in a loose formation and looked out for possible dangers, while RelevantKitty inserted herself into the center of our group, close to Anita and me. I couldn't see the faces of our N7 security detail, but from how always one had their torso turned towards us, it was clear that they kept an eye out for her. When we left the landing area, we crossed a small area where dozens of different species watched as we went through. For me, it was the first time I saw so many aliens in person. Turians, Asari, Salarian, Volus, and even a Hanar watched as we passed by. But what really left me speechless was the beauty of the Presidium. It was everything I had expected and then some. The lake was crystal clear, and the trees looked as if a gardener just tended to them. In the distance, I could even see the Krogan statues standing proudly in the lake. As we made our way towards the Citadel Tower, Wakari started to explain the origins of the Citadel and its discovery through the Asari. Most of it was nothing but praise for the Protheans for building such an incredible space station, but even then, I only listened half-heartedly. After all, when you knew the truth about the station, it wasn't that interesting. I managed to insert a question or two and made the right noises to seem interested in her explanation. But my focus was on the station itself and the people that watched us. Before I knew it, we had already entered the elevator that would lead us up the Citadel Tower into the council chambers. Our CSEC escort didn't come with us, but I was sure that more waited on the upper floor. And let me tell you one thing, those elevators are not slow. Most definitely not. It covered 4 kilometers in almost 3 minutes. That is not slow. When the doors opened on the floor of the council chambers, Wakari was the first to exit. She turned around and said to Anita, "I hope you like the tour through the Presidium. I'm sure we can arrange more extensive ones in the coming days if you wish so. The council awaits you at the other end of this floor." Without waiting for a response, she disappeared through the line of CSEC guards that held back the civilians that had come to the council chambers to catch a first look at the new species. While crossing the chambers, I tried to calm my beating heart, which had at one point started to beat a mile per minute. Perhaps it was the fact that I was part of a moment that would definitely make it into the history books. Or because I was stared at like a monkey in a zoo. Who knows? Then came the moment we went up the last staircase, and when we arrived at the top, I only had eyes for what was before me. On 3 raised platforms were, from left to right, a Turian, an Asari, and a Salarian. The Asari in the middle lifted her left hand, and silence ensued inside the chamber. Then she spoke in her melodious voice as she invitingly spread her arms. In the name of the Council and the Citadel, I welcome you, representatives of humanity, to the greater galactic community. Chapter 11. June 23, 2158, 1621. Widow System, Citadel, Council Chambers. In the name of the Council and the Citadel, I welcome you, representatives of humanity, to the greater galactic community. With these words from the Asari Counselor, the first official meeting between humanity and the Citadel began. She put her right hand over the place where a human's heart would be and inclined her head for a fraction. Her melodious voice spoke of training and experience in diplomatic and political affairs as she greeted us. I am Counselor Tavos of the Asari Republics, and in their name I greet you once again, she said with a smile, something that was so irrefutable human that I could feel how my companions were baffled for a moment. Not that I was any better. The Asari may look like human women, but in the end, they were not. In the games, it was just an accepted fact that aliens existed. They used human gestures, and their mouths moved perfectly to imitate the translated words. It was just a game, after all, made by humans for humans. But this was not a video game. Not for me, not anymore. And that was what baffled us so much. Counselor Tavos could have learned about smiling through research, but it looked so natural that it couldn't be something she just had learned. That 2 distinct species, evolving on 2 different planets, thousands of light years apart, could develop the same gesture, probably even with the same meaning. The odds for such an occurrence had to be close to 0. Close to 0, but not impossible, as we could see. After Tavos raised her head, the Salarian to her left continued with the introduction, and this time I noticed that his mouth did not move to fit the human words I heard. The volume of my translation device hindered me from hearing his original language, but I would try to listen to the Turian counselor's language after the Salarian. I'm Counselor Sikar, delegate of the Salarioan Union, he said slowly and carefully, as if stopping himself from rushing his words. I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case. The image of Salarians, which I had in mind, was always that of a fast-talking Morden Solus. While it was a generalization of a whole species, the fact of them talking fast was probably true. Their short lifespan emphasized the need for efficiency, and to speak slowly would not fit into that. And if my guess was correct, then Counselor Sakar had been elevated to the position of counselor very recently. Just as the Turian counselor was about to introduce himself, I remembered to tone down the volume of my translator. Only enough to hear how he spoke in his native language, but still loud enough to listen to the translation. It was an odd mix of whistling and chirping, a metallic undertone added to it. Nothing that a human could imitate without either insulting someone's mother or speaking with a dialect that would make every Turian in hearing range laugh. I am Counselor Adarki, representative of the Turian hierarchy. He spoke full of pride and confidence. Even though the translators weren't yet sophisticated enough to catch emotional nuances in an alien's voice, the confidence of the Turian was plain to see. It wasn't that I had become an expert in Turian body language, but the general feeling I got of Counselor Adarki was one of self-confidence. The traditional markings every Turian had consisted of red bars on his mandibles and a V on his forehead. The red was almost shining in the light of the chambers. "It is a great honor to be here," said Anita, after it was clear that the introductions of the counselors were over. "My name is Anita Goyle, a representative of humanity, together with my associate, Oscar Denebrin." When Anita called my name, I had just returned my translator settings to normal, and I used a greeting closely resembling that of Counselor Tavos. "It is an honor to meet you," I said. and put my right fist over my heart and bowed slightly. "It is also an honor to us to greet a new race on the Citadel," answered Counselor Tavos practiced. "Before we begin with the official matters which brought us together today, I would like to give a brief overview of our history in the Citadel, so that we can move forward with understanding in our hearts." While nicely put, I knew what she was really doing. She wanted to awe us with the long history of their civilization, to let us feel small in their presence. Furthermore, depending on what she understood under the word brief, it could also be a tactic to exhaust us, to make us worn out for when the real diplomatic talks would begin. Anita, ever the seasoned diplomat, knew this as well, but her response was just a smile. "We will gladly listen. Understanding is the first step to living side by side peacefully. Of course, I will do the same after you finish, Counselor Tavos. If that is agreeable for you." I had to suppress a smirk when Anita took the ball and placed it back into the council's court masterfully. "An excellent suggestion, Diplomat Goyle." "Eager to learn," answered Counselor Sekar, the Solarian, not noticing the side glance that the Turian counselor gave him. "Then let us begin," said Counselor Tavos, her smile straining for a moment that only the most observant noticed. And my guess was correct. The brief overview was to wear us out. It was arduously long, with no new information provided. It would have been a novel experience if we hadn't known most of it from the Turian Codex we salvaged. A few interesting tidbits were among her explanation, but were ultimately insignificant. Her take on the Rockney War and the Krogan Rebellion was unsurprisingly one-sided to put the Council and, by extension, the Citadel in a better light. She mentioned the Quarians only in passing and lost no word about the Geth. While she continued to describe the arrival of the Batarians on the Citadel, I took a moment to observe the other people in the room. There was a group with one representative of every species associated with the Citadel standing close by. A Honor, a Volus, and an Elcor stood pretty close to each other, probably discussing something with each other if I interpreted the Hanar's flashing right. I wasn't absolutely sure, but I thought to remember that Hanar communicated via bioluminescence, and that instead of speaking words like any other species present, their bodies glowed in specific intervals when they were saying something. Apart from this group stood a lonely Batarian who followed the happenings closely, his head bent slightly to his right, a gesture that would mean confusion or curiosity to a human, but to a Batarian it meant something different. I heard or read somewhere, in my old life, that the angle a Batarian bent his head or how his eyes moved was the way how they expressed impressions or emotions subtly. And that specific angle was to show superiority to someone he sees as a lesser being. I stopped myself from rolling my eyes, knowing that I was probably correct from what I knew about Batarian culture. It wasn't much that I knew, but what I knew was more than enough. Enough to know that humanity and the Batarians would never become even remotely friends. I turned my attention back to the counselors when Tavos seemed to get to the end of her brief overview. While the Solarian counselor looked as attentive as ever, Counselor Attiki seemed like he would prefer to be anywhere but here at the moment, or so it seemed from the way his left index talon tapped his right arm rhythmically. "I thank you, Counselor Tavos, for your detailed overview of the Citadel's history," said Anita after Counselor Tavos finished. "Now I would like to tell you about humanity's history, if you would like." "Please, go ahead," was Counselor Tavos's response, professionally ignoring Adarki's grumble. Anita, adept at reading a room's mood, kept her retelling of our species' history short. In not even 10 minutes, she covered our beginnings as traveling hunters and gatherers to becoming farmers that stayed in one place, from our formation of villages to the creation of nations. She talked about how the discovery of making fire set us on a path of advancement that would lead us to leave our homeworld one day. If there was one thing that Anita could do better than anyone else, it was telling a compelling story. Even the Turian counselor, who had been pretty bored during Tavos's explanation, was listening intently. At that moment, Anita had the attention of the whole galaxy. "Thank you, Diplomat Goyle, for the wonderful retelling of your kind's history," said Counselor Tavos, still a bit mesmerized. "It really was," commented Counselor Attiki, "so full of life, I almost could see how their species evolved before my eyes." Wouldn't you say so too, Counselor Tavos? You didn't need a sophisticated translation device to hear the amount of sarcasm Counselor Adderchi directed at the Asari. In any direct comparison between the Asari counselor and Anita, Tavos' way of telling the history of the Citadel would be found lacking. You're right, answered Tavos, her smile straining a bit at the Turian's dig. But there are more matters that we need to discuss today. For example, the creation of an official peace treaty between the Turian hierarchy and the Systems Alliance. With those words, all lightheartedness present in the room disappeared at once, and a more solemn mood came into being. That is a matter that should not be delayed, said Adarki, his posture going rigid for a moment before slightly relaxing. The Primarch of Palaven, the highest leader of the Turian hierarchy, has given me the permission to negotiate such a treaty. Do you, Diplomat Goyle, have this authority as well? I do, Counselor Adarki, answered Anita concisely. Then let me tell you in the name of the hierarchy that we truly regret that it came to this incident and that the hierarchy is prepared to pay reparations. That was more than we had hoped to expect. In most of the discussions between Anita and me, we thought that the Turians would say that they were sorry but would be too prideful for anything else. Offering to pay reparations was not something we expected to get from the Turians so readily. Maybe they had seen something of themselves in how we stood our ground and fought back in the face of unfavorable odds. It could also be that they saw us as a potential ally, one that could help in defending the borders of Citadel space. Whatever the reason was, it started the negotiations in a good tone. In the name of humanity, I accept the apology of the Turian hierarchy, said Anita, bowing her head slightly in gratitude. Counselor Adarki's words, not even fazing her for a moment. Our diplomats can discuss the details of the reparations at another time. But there is one thing that my people are demanding before a peace treaty can be signed. And what is this thing? Anita took one deep breath before saying only one word that echoed in the chambers. Justice. I see, said Counselor Adderki, crossing his arms and leaning back a bit. Your people want the perpetrators of the attack on your colony to stand trial, if I understand correctly. That is correct. You understand that my people acted accordingly to Citadel law? The unsanctioned opening of a mass relay is a capital offense punishable by death. We learned of this law only after the diplomatic envoy arrived in the Shanxi system. Before that, we didn't even know that the Citadel existed. May contribute to discussion, interrupted Counselor Sekar before Adderki could reply. Citadel law clear on subject of opening relays. My people went over them in the last months, personally rechecked them as well. But only in Citadel space. Not in the territory of humanity. Situation like in the Terminus systems. Opening of relays heavily discouraged, but not forbidden, in theory. That certainly puts things in perspective, sighed Counselor Adderki before straightening himself and turning his head towards the other two counselors. Counselor Tavos, Counselor Sekar, I would like to propose that the relay protocols are revised and broadened so that such a situation like we have now can't happen again. I was about to propose the same as well, answered Tavos while Sekar only nodded. That still leaves the issue of a trial for the perpetrators responsible for the attack, reminded Anita before the subject got swept away by other issues. The Turian hierarchy will take care of it. Do not worry, assured Counselor Adarki. That is not something that the Alliance will accept. We will not send our people to you to be made an example of, responded Adarki heatedly. Anita held her hands up in a placating manner and returned, That is not our intention, Counselor. We never expected you to transfer the perpetrators to us for trial. She wasn't lying. We never expected them to do this, but that didn't mean we wouldn't have liked it if they did. It is just that we wish for the courts of law here on the Citadel to hold the trial. My people will not accept that a Turian sentences one of his own for crimes against them. To them, it will seem like you are too biased to deliver a just verdict. Adarki was about to open his mouth to respond when Counselor Tavos inserted herself into the argument. The integrity of the Turians is unquestionable. On that you can trust me. For that comment, she earned a grateful nod from the Turian counselor. But your species only arrived in the greater galaxy. It is normal that your people have reservations against fully trusting someone you've just met. With Counselor Adarki's consent, I would like to organize a team of judges consisting of all council species so that the Turians have a say in the judgment and that impartiality is ensured. It spoke of Counselor Tavos's long diplomatic practice. In one move, she integrated herself into an argument before it could become heated and gave a solution that helped the Turians to save face and gave us what we wanted. The Turian hierarchy gives its consent, said Counselor Adarki, taking the opportunity as it presented itself. The Human System Alliance also consents, commented Anita as if our agreement had been necessary. Then may I take this as a sign that there is nothing else in the way of signing an official peace treaty between the Turian hierarchy and the System Alliance? Asked Tavos. Neither Anita nor the Turian counselor objected to her claim, and a practiced beaming smile spread on the Asari's face. An Asari, dressed in a modest dress, came towards Anita and carried a datapad in her hand. One of our guards stepped in her way and held his hand out for the datapad, which she gave him without complaining. The datapad remained in his hands no longer than a moment before Anita had it. She quickly read over the displayed treaty and signed with a flourish. The Turian counselor, on the other hand, just tipped a few commands in the console before him. And with that, any and all armed conflict between the Turian hierarchy and humanity is ended, proclaimed Counselor Tavos. May the goddess watch over our all future. Applause echoed in the chambers, and probably among the Citadel wards, or even other worlds, if this meeting was broadcasted live over the extranet. After the applause settled, Anita gave me a subtle nod to tell me that it was time for our gift. It was something found on Shangxi, and I saw it on a list of salvaged goods only by coincidence. The moment I read its description, I reread the Turian Codex to check if I remembered it correctly and put up a request to deliver it to me. Nothing endears you to someone as much as when you give them a part of their cultural heritage back. Counselor Adarki, I said, speaking only for the second time in this place. When I saw that his attention was on me, I slowly put my hand in my jacket to pull out the package I secured there. While slowly pulling it out so that my actions would not be interpreted as dangerous, I said, in light of today's events, we have a gift for the Turian people. A gift, he questioned. What kind of gift? Well, it is not exactly a gift, I answered with a slight smirk. It is more the act of returning something that belongs to your people. I held the package out to a Turian CSEC officer, who took it and went towards Counselor Adarki, but not without discreetly scanning it with his Omni tool. Adarki took the package from the CSEC officer after getting the confirmation that it was safe. The moment he opened it, his eyes went wide and his mandibles fell slightly. This is, he stammered, completely astonished. If I may ask, Adarki, what is it? Asked Counselor Tavos. It is the banner of the 38th Regiment. I got reports that it was lost during the battles, presumably destroyed, Adarki answered, his focus not wavering away from the banner. After half a minute of silence, he raised his head and looked me in the eyes and said, I and every other Turian thank you and your people for giving this back to us. Since you did, I guess you know of its importance? We do, Counselor, I responded. In our studies of the Galactic Codex, I came across the section that explained the importance of the regiment banners to the Turian people. Something like that has to be returned to its rightful owner. Counselor Adarki just nodded and glanced one last time at the banner before handing it off to one of his aides, who took it with reverence. Somehow I knew that with that move, humanity made another good impression on not just the Turian hierarchy, but on the other Citadel species as well. The Turian counselor cleared his throat and asked, Didn't we have more things that we needed to discuss? I think we should continue. And we did. First came the discussions of humanity holding to all Citadel treaties if we wanted to become an associated species. The banning of unsanctioned openings of mass relay became a topic once again, but was ultimately the easiest to agree on. While we were on the topic of relay, Anita didn't manage that the fleet behind the Shanxi relay towards Citadel territory withdrew, but she achieved a partial success in that no more ships would be added and that the Turians reduced their presence by around a third. The Solarians and Asari would fill that hole as fast as they could. That meant that they either would be sent shortly after the meeting or that they would never arrive before we joined the Citadel, making the fleet unnecessary. Just as we came to an end with our discussion about the Treaty of Ferrixon and what exactly the stipulations were, the Solarian counselor said, "We will need an evaluation of your dreadnought count, of course. A Spectre will be sent for this. In around 5 years, if you consent." "We consent to the evaluation, though we must require that any Spectre sent into Alliance territory notifies the official authorities," responded Anita. "That is highly unusual, Diplomat Goyle. Normally, Spectres do not have any obligation to report their presence to any authority," said Counselor Tavos. "Their line of work often requires them to act fast and concealed. To let anyone know of their presence could mean a difference in accomplishing or failing their mission. We acknowledge the fact that Spectres usually have the freedom to decide how they accomplish their goal," placated Anita. "But at this time, we are worried about the implications they could have on our people." "What kind of implications are you thinking of, Diplomat Goyle?" questioned Counselor Adderkey. "As we understand it, a Spectre's actions are not punishable by law, no matter what offense. We fear that if a Spectre has to take drastic measures to reach his goal without any input from official authorities, it could create xenophobic sentiments among our citizens. They would not see an agent who does his, or her, best to protect all species of the Citadel, but an alien that killed without reprisal. Since we are democratic, this could lead to someone coming into power who would not pursue friendly relations." "That would be indeed troublesome," the Solarian counselor commented. "We understand your concerns," said Counselor Tavos, "but that is the way Spectres have operated for centuries. Surely that should be enough to give them the trust needed." "We humans have a saying," I interjected, "that trust is earned and not given. I implore you to let us observe how the Spectres work for a time until we too come to trust them. You do." The counselors exchanged glances, and I could see how Counselor Sakar gave a nigh unnoticeable nod. "We concur that for such a young species as humanity, the freedom the Spectres have can be unsettling," said Counselor Tavos as their chosen spokesperson. "In that light, we agree that Spectres will report to human authorities if they have missions that bring them into your territory, at least until you have fully joined the Citadel." "Thank you, counselors," Anita and I said at the same time. After a short silence, Counselor Tavos continued to say, "I believe we have discussed all major topics that needed to be addressed. Furthermore, I am of the opinion that we all need a break. We have prepared rooms in one of the best hotels here on the Presidium for you." "We thank you for your generosity," said Anita. "I declare this meeting adjourned." June 23, 2158, 2246, Widow System, Citadel, Hotel Cyrenea. I stood at the window that encompassed one side of the communal room of the hotel suite they had given us, looking out at the Presidium. While the current activity could not compare to its daytime business, and probably to any time in the wards, life was still going on. Behind me, the majority of our group was engaged in quiet conversation about the day's proceedings. Two of Anita and my security detail were already asleep, resting for a later shift of keeping watch. I could hear Anderson's and Ryder's voices, but I didn't focus on what they said. An hour ago, they had declared the suite free of any listening devices. The devices they had found were thrown out the door, but not destroyed. Ryder had jokingly said that they looked expensive and wanted to give them back to our listeners. Courtesy and a warning in one. While I was observing the view, I noticed in the reflection of the window that Anita approached me with a wine glass in each hand. I took the one she held out to me with a quick "thank you" and clinked glasses with her. The quality of the wine was excellent, and I immediately recognized the taste. How could I not, when it was the same wine my father bought on the day I was born? He wanted to drink this wine with my mom and me when I became an adult. Sadly, that never happened since both died before that day. When I became 18, I only drank a third of the bottle and kept the rest. It was my way to thank my parents for giving me this life, something I would be grateful for till I died again. The bottle of wine from the year 2100, or century wine as some call it, pressed in France, had a place of honor in my apartment in London. "Do we have something to celebrate?" I asked with a side glance to Anita. "I remember that you said you would only bring this wine out if we had something to celebrate." In my opinion, the fact that our first meeting with the council went better than expected is something to celebrate. answered Anita with a smile and took a sip of her wine. "I just wanted to check on you. What are you thinking right now?" I hummed non-committal, asking her a question in return. "When you look out, what do you see?" I guess you don't want the literal answer, so I give, I don't know, opportunities. "For what?" she asked. "Technological, social, medical, or what?" "All that and more," I answered with a smile. "Do you see those sky cars flying around?" "I do. What about them?" "They are a perfect example," I said and pointed at one. "We do not have the know-how or the industrial capabilities to create so many of them, especially for people of all ways of life. In that, they have us beat. But I do see one point where we will find our own niche in this market." "How so?" questioned Anita. "I know that you're good at what you're doing, but the Citadel species had centuries to refine their design, their engines, their everything. It wouldn't be possible to supplant the established brands. They will always be cheaper than yours, at least for decades, maybe even centuries." I couldn't hold a snort back as she said that, and I asked amusedly, "What makes you think I want to fight them with prices? That would just be plain stupid. If not that, what would you do?" One of the best qualities that humanity possesses, one that I greatly admire, is individuality. And with that in mind, I will find a way to carve out a part of the market for myself. Individuality. "What are you?" started Anita before slowly coming to the same realization as I did as she continued to watch the sky cars. "They all look the same." "That's right," I agreed. "The only difference between them is their paint job and what specifications they have. But every car body is the same. And don't forget that we're on the Presidium, the place where only the rich and influential live." "You don't want to make them better or cheaper?" realized Anita. "You want to make them look different." "Correct again," I replied with a smirk on my face. "Why should I fight on a battlefield my opponents had centuries to make it their own? It isn't just a human thing to try to be different from the others. It's just that we take more pride in the sentiment. Everybody wants to be seen, everybody wants to be noticed, and I will make use of that." I took a small breath and finished with a statement that would partly define the coming years. "Individuality is our greatest advantage, and I will show the galaxy what happens if thousands of individuals come together. Because then they can turn fantasy into reality, and no dream seems unachievable." Chapter 12. December 11, 2159. 1327 STE, Arcturus. Arcturus Station, unfinished. Parliament Chambers. With measured steps, I joined Andrew at the railing of the highest terrace that overlooked the chambers of the Parliament. The chambers had been constructed in a way that there were 3 levels of terraces that went around the length of the room and were open to the public to watch the proceedings. Not many people were watching yet, but that had nothing to do with disinterest in the proceedings, especially today. The plans for Arcturus Station had been drawn up years ago, but never realized. At first, due to the fact that Reach was close enough to Earth, there hadn't been any immediate need for a space station in the Arcturus system, even if it was what we called a crossroads system, a system with multiple primary and secondary relays. But now that we know that there were other civilizations traversing the stars and using the relays as their principal mode of transportation, the need for a defensible station in the Arcturus system skyrocketed. While Reach would stay as the main seat of the Alliance military, Arcturus Station would become the seat of the Alliance government, partly because of the symbolic significance the station represented. The fact that it was a space station made it easy to show that the Alliance Parliament represented humanity on the galactic stage, and not just a single world. After all, it was easier to consider space as neutral ground than a planet. But Arcturus Station wasn't supposed to be only the center of our government. No, it would become more than that. A trading hub, a military defense station, a place to live, in short, our very own imitation of the Citadel. It would become a monument to our abilities, our pride, and depending on how you looked at it, our arrogance. That was how the other galactic civilization would probably see it. And because of that, there can be no doubt that this is the beginning of a new chapter in humanity's history. It is now our duty to make it one of our grandest. Seems like Michael's speech is still going on, huh? I commented as I relaxed against the railing. That's President Port to you, Minister Dennebrun, scolded Andrew lightheartedly. A chuckle escaped me, and I retorted, if you want to nitpick, then at least do it right. It's temporary president and minister. You're the one with the validated position, Director Clark. We all know that the vote for Michel's rise to the position of President of the Alliance Parliament is nothing more than a formality. Just like the elections in 4 years, he will win those too. After that, well, we'll see who we can move into a favorable position, and your position is a given as well. Nobody knows the economic workings of the Alliance as well as you, and Michael is anything but stupid. What Andrew was saying was true. While there would be a vote of who would become the very first president of the Systems Alliance, it was a foregone conclusion. There was only one other candidate, and I wasn't even sure if he was a member of the Parliament. It could have been the janitor for all I knew. There was not one person who seriously wanted to go up against the founder of the Alliance. They would lose so badly it wouldn't even be funny. The name was just there because it was proper. Anything else could be called political suicide by idiocy. And with Michael came the rest of us too. By the way, nice touch with a must have served 5 years in a military role as a requirement for the position of Minister of Defense. Should hopefully keep most of the idiots away, said Andrew. Couldn't have been easy to get the nations and colonies to agree to that. Actually, it was easy, I countered. Most nations on Earth still have their own militaries, so they think they can get someone into that position that is sympathetic to them. Besides, if they disagreed, their citizens would only hear that they were against the fact that a position concerning military matters would be filled with someone who has experience in this field. They would probably demonstrate or riot again. The climate just isn't right for the voices that would call this warmongering. And the colonies just had to ask them who they would rather have in this position, someone knowing what must be done or a pampered civilian from Earth. You got to love stereotypes sometimes. Stereotyping can be a slippery slope, warned Andrew, his voice rising a bit and gaining a dangerous edge. In my business, that can lead to underestimating your opponents, and that means usually defeat. I raised my hands placatingly and said, I know, don't worry, I'm not underestimating anyone. Sorry, apologized Andrew. It seems like I'm still a bit miffed that those Solarians escaped my trap. It's been a year since then, and you are still angry about that? Andrew mumbled something unintelligible before replying, a bit, yeah. I underestimated them, or got cocky, doesn't matter which. But it was my fault they got away. I'm sure they got nothing vital from us, so that is a plus point. Besides, I said, stereotypes are just a way for us to categorize the world around us. When they turn into prejudice, it gets dangerous, because from prejudice, it's only a short step to discrimination. Then what is the difference between a stereotype and prejudice? Emotions, to be precise, negative emotions, I explained. If you dislike something because of a predetermined opinion, it's a prejudice. A stereotype is more like a label you give something. In most cases, it is a label you give to a group, to generalize them, to make them different from your own group. It is something humans have always done and will always do. It's part of the us versus them mentality. Andrew's fingers beat rhythmically on the railing before him, thinking for a moment before he inquired, and you use this mentality to your advantage, I guess. But before I could answer him, he came to the correct conclusion himself. I see how you would use it. Make yourself and your opposite number part of an us, and then show him a them to stand against. Quite ingenious. A smirk found its way onto my face at Andrew's deduction. You're right, I confirmed. It makes whoever you're negotiating with more open to your ideas. With nothing more to say for the moment, silence ensued between us. Silently, we listened to Michael's speech we had partially ignored during our conversation. After all, it wasn't like we didn't know what he would be saying. Both of us had to listen to this exact speech twice before today because Michael wanted this speech to be perfect. And when the big boss asks you for a favor, you can't say no. Still, listening to him practicing and listening to him performing it were two very different things. Upon a stage, Michel's whole being came alive, and there wasn't a single person who wouldn't get swept along by his charisma and enthusiasm. Not alone. Our first contact may have been violent, but it must not determine our path forward. After all, we You know, I said, drawing Andrew's attention back to me, I'm happy we met aliens so fast. Andrew raised an eyebrow at my comment and then said more than an asterisk, something to do with the us versus them mentality again. As always, Andrew had quickly connected my comment to my previous explanation and drew the correct conclusion. It leads to it, I agreed, and continued by asking him a question. If we didn't meet those other galactic civilizations, what do you think humanity would have done? Grow apart, he answered after thinking about my question for a few minutes. Every planet we colonize would, with time, develop its own distinct culture and mindset. Depending on their development, this could lead to large disparities between them, which in turn would perhaps breed resentment between more and less developed colonies. If that issue would be left alone for too long, armed conflict or even civil war could very well happen. That is something I fear could have happened, I admitted. We humans have never shied away from conflict, no matter what kind, as long as it stays political, philosophical, or, hell, a race to one-up each other, everything is fine. The problem is that it is just a matter of time until one person takes it to the extreme, and from there is going to snowball. In the Citadel species, give us a tangible reason to stand together, an us that encompasses the whole of humanity, but must take care not to steer humanity in a mindset that sees the Citadel species as an enemy. True, that would be unfavorable. A short moment of silence passed between us as I thought about that problem until a word popped into my mind that could perhaps help us with this issue. Perhaps we should encourage a sort of rivalry between us and most of the Council species. Competing against them in different areas will hopefully stop most intentions to paint them as enemies. So, a fluid place in the us versus them mentality, keeping our view of them flexible enough to see them as potential allies sometime in the future, concluded Andrew, following our previous line of thought. But don't think I didn't notice that you said most of them. Not all. I guess you're thinking of excluding the Batarians? I did my best to hold back a burst of full-blown laughter at the thought of us playing nice with the Batarians for any amount of time. A chuckle escaped me nonetheless, and I could see Andrew was fighting the same problem. Why should we include them? I asked amusedly. Their cultural heritage makes the Batarians such a good enemy to unite against. Indeed, snorted Andrew. It is as if the galaxy gave us exactly what we needed. I still don't understand why the Council allowed this practice to continue for so long. The Asari, I can understand, think that they can change the Batarian culture if they wait long enough. But why the Turians haven't made any move is something that eludes me. Complacency, wanting to keep the status quo, there are tons of reasons for that. From what I've gathered, the Batarians are the only ones that have any kind of influence in the Terminus systems, mostly because they have their hands in whatever's happening there. Furthermore, the Asari and Solarians are probably stopping any Turian moves in that direction because they have colonies that are not that far from the edge of the Terminus systems. But now that we have emerged so close to Batarian territory, the Council will want to put us into conflict with each other. That way they will only have to watch out for any incursions from the Terminus systems. The question is what we will do in response to that, I said, and let my sight wander through the chambers, watching the representatives from the planets belonging to the Systems Alliance. In my opinion, we should let that happen. It will be a good opportunity to sharpen our fangs and show the galaxy what we can bring to the table, reasoned Andrew. Besides, it will help us in the long run when we decide to push for a council seat. There was nothing in Andrew's logic that I could refute. While I wasn't happy with the fact that this would mean that the Batarians would target our less defended colonies to enslave their populations, I also understood that they would do so no matter what. If not by themselves, then by using pirates as intermediaries. The temptation to possess slaves belonging to a newly discovered species was too great to ignore. I think you're right, I conceded, but that doesn't mean I have to like it. I don't like it too, but we must face the fact that it will happen. The only thing we can do is to turn it to our advantage and do our best to protect our colonies and people. They are our greatest assets. Suddenly Andrew frowned, his whole demeanor changing, as if he was thinking about something unpleasant. When we're already talking about protecting valuable assets, he began, we need to speak about how we keep the DR drive to ourselves. It is one of the best advantages that we have. The option to operate outside of the relay network is nothing short of amazing. We can't allow this advantage to slip through our fingers. Is this place secure? I asked instead of answering him. Yes, I made sure of that personally. No bugs anywhere close to us, and I carry a device with me that will stop directional microphones. Only option would be a video and then calling a lip reader. At his words, I leaned forward, placing my elbows on the railing and crossing my hands before my mouth. Andrew immediately understood what I was doing and copied my posture. When trying to keep something secret, you did everything to reduce the chance of being overheard. And the longer I could keep the security features of the DR drive secret, the better. From the very beginning, Takahashi and I thought about how we could prevent the DR drive falling into the wrong hands, and have since then implemented multiple security features. We have divided the drive into 4 parts that are scattered throughout any ship with a DR drive: the navigational computer, the power generator, the device for opening and closing the rifts, and one more component that I will not tell you. Should any of these parts be removed without entering the correct codes, which have to be confirmed by our network, the data will purge itself. Furthermore, this will trigger small, localized explosions that will turn the parts into nothing more than pieces of junk. And what happens if somebody collects enough of the different parts? Asked Andrew, our voices barely above a whisper and able to be heard with Michael's speech still going on. Every drive is a unique copy with its own specialized codes. And if they don't match, our network has to confirm the combination, else the security features activate. Furthermore, if someone tries to change the codes, the same happens. The only security vulnerability is when someone manages to emulate our network, but we constantly improve it. We thought about not being able to combine parts of different drives, but dismissed the idea. The upkeep would have been almost impossible otherwise. After I finished speaking, I changed my posture to signal Andrew that the part of our conversation that needed the utmost secrecy was over. Seeing that, Andrew relaxed his posture as well, and I could see in his face that he was pleased with the steps we had taken to protect the DR drive. But he still had to point one thing out. Even with all this, there is no way to ensure that nobody else will be able to recreate the DR drive. Be it domestic or otherwise, it will be only a matter of time, said Andrew. I know, but we will do our best to delay that moment, I replied. That's one of the reasons why we relocated our production facilities to Reach. And without a DR drive, it is difficult to travel to Reach in a timely manner. Plus, the military will be very interested in keeping the DR drives for themselves. Of course, I will do my best to support their endeavor, promised Andrew. He looked down at the members of the parliament, and his eyes narrowed in suspicion as he said, "But I cannot promise that those people down there won't try to get their hands on it to sell it to the highest bidder. No matter if they are human or not, greed and the promise of power is sometimes too tempting to resist." I snorted amusedly at the thought of them trying and answered Andrew's unasked question when he looked at me with a raised eyebrow. "Let them try," I said confidently. "The DR drive is not the property of the Alliance, but of Ad Astra. Takahashi and I haven't patented the plans for the DR drive, so we don't have to publicize them, and they are welcome to try to replicate them. Furthermore, we have a contract of exclusivity with the Alliance military. If they try to force us in any way, they will quickly learn that this way leads to political and financial suicide. My lawyers and analysts have the domestic side under control, and even if someone can recreate it, my R&D team will be years, no decades ahead of them. And about the other species, well, I don't think we have to worry too much for the next 50 years or so." "Not worry too much?" asked Andrew skeptically, and I couldn't blame him for his skepticism. "I would think that at least the Solarians will figure out how to build one before that." "They will," I agreed and asked a question in return. "But will they use it in any way that could be dangerous for us?" Before Andrew could think of a reply, I continued to tell him my thoughts about the issue. The way I see it, there are only 4 species that would have any interest in replicating the DR drive. 5 if you count the Volus, who will follow the Turians more or less. Let me guess, the Asari, the Solarians, the Turians, and the Batarians. "Exactly," I confirmed. "The Elcor will be too passive to do anything, and the Hanar are not interested in anything that does not come from the Enkindlers, as they call the Protheans. The Drell will follow the lead of the Hanar, so no problem there. The Batarian hegemon will try to get their hands on some, partly because they want to expand their territory and to use them to get more slaves. Andrew nodded, following my explanation so far. He still had some reservations, but was willing to let me explain fully before adding his own thoughts. They will never ask or negotiate to get even one. Their arrogance will not allow that. Instead, the hegemony will try to steal ships that have a DR drive, probably by using pirates, so that nothing can be traced back to them. Maybe I underestimate them, but I don't think their scientists and engineers are skilled enough to recreate the DR drive with only one stolen ship. They will need dozens, perhaps even hundreds, and that number doesn't even include the ships the pirates will try to keep for themselves instead of giving them to the hegemony. I see where you're coming from, but what about the Council? They certainly have the means to do it, inquired Andrew. The Council, huh? I repeated and thought about where to start. Let's begin with the Asari. After all, they are the most technologically advanced species in the galaxy right now. They will be most certainly interested in it. But since it is a purely human design, they will dismiss it in the beginning. The Asari are almost as fanatically as the Han are in the belief of Prothean superiority. Only after they can't deny its usefulness anymore will they try to get their hands on one. I stopped for a moment in my explanation to consider if this was the time I could drop a hint that the Asari had a working Prothean beacon. If someone else had this specific knowledge, it would give me a reason for knowing when I had to use it in any negotiation with the Asari. Besides, sometimes it is more effective to let your opponent know that a group knew your secrets but didn't do anything with them, instead of only one person who could be silenced more easily. In the end, I decided against dropping a hint, at least for the time being. The Alliance's position was in no way strong enough to deal with any open or covert backslash the Asari could throw at us. The Asari longevity would indeed make them slower to react. We see it in humanity too, that older people react slower to changes than young ones, said Andrew, taking my moment of contemplation to add his own thoughts. Furthermore, the Asari will feel secure in their position as the most advanced species in the galaxy. Not even the Solarians could contest that position in a millennium. But what about the other two Council species? His question brought me out of my musings, and I continued to explain my thoughts about the two remaining Council species. The Turians will see the potential the DR drive has, and not just from a military standpoint. Worlds based on dextro amino acids are rare, and there could be dozens around Palaven alone, but with no relay connecting them. Same with planets that have the specific gas concentration the Volus need. The moment they hear about the DR drive's capabilities, they will devote resources to create their own. But they will be too prideful to ask us for help or even steal from us, the newcomers to the galactic stage. It will take them years until they get a working prototype. Their knowledge in ESO-tech is more of a hindrance than a help, since it has nothing to do with ESO. Besides, we will have an ally in delaying the Turian efforts to recreate it. Who? Andrew began to ask before the answer came to him. The Solarians, of course. They will not want them to have this technology before having a counter ready, or at least the means to monitor their movements. The biggest military force in the galaxy, able to pop up wherever they want, that doesn't seem like something the Solarians would want the Turians to have. I thought the same too. My impression of the Solarians is that they like to have control, and anything that they can't control has to be delayed until they can. Wouldn't surprise me. Nobody can tell me that everything between the Council species is roses and sunshine. Now, as we have already mentioned them, what are your thoughts about the Solarians? I do not doubt that the Solarians can and will replicate the DR drive, maybe even in the next 10 years, I said, a smirk growing on my face that had Andrew confused. But I also know that their first experiments with it will probably end in disaster. A disaster? Andrew's voice was tinged by confusion, and his face reflected that as well. A disaster, I confirmed. Did you know that one of the reasons why our ships are slower than their Turian equivalents is that ours are heavier? The hulls of our starships are denser and thicker. Do you know why? I remember vaguely to have heard that it is because of radiation, but what kind of radiation I do not know. Partly it is because of the cosmic rays, but thinner hulls would do the job just as well. Our first designs were bulky because we wanted to make sure that nothing could happen. However, since we created the DR drive, We made the hulls just as thick or even thicker than before, and we're planning to make them even thicker. What does that tell you? I could see how Andrew thought about my question, recalling every bit of information he had of the DR drive and the phenomenon that allowed us to travel between star systems with it. "There is some kind of radiation inside the rift, isn't there?" exclaimed Andrew. "Bingo! In the rift, there are 3 or 4 kinds of radiation we've never encountered before. They don't even have names yet. The fact is that those radiations can be deadly to humans or any living being that does not possess a metallic carapace like the Turians. And even then, long-term damage is guaranteed if they are exposed to it too long. The density of the Turian ship hulls is barely enough. But there is one more problem, and I'm truly glad that we caught it before something happened," I said and took a deep breath. "Ezo slowly destabilizes if it is exposed to the radiations inside the rift." "Say what?" asked Andrew harshly, not quite believing what he just heard. "Ezo destabilizes inside the rift, and that can lead to malfunctions in the best and explosions in the worst-case scenario. The stronger the radiation, the faster it happens. Intriguingly, the more pure Ezo is, the faster it destabilizes as well. That is one of the reasons why nothing happened until now, since our refining methods are not that sophisticated yet," I explained grimly. "What are you doing in reaction to this?" "We're checking each ship and, if needed, exchange the Ezo core. It's already costing us millions, and that number will only go up, but it has to be done. The degraded Ezo is currently stored in some out-of-the-way storehouses. A few of my scientists are analyzing it, checking if it is possible to use it in engines again or to make a weapon out of it. Seems like you have the problem under control, and good work with keeping it on the down low." "I haven't even heard a whisper of it," said Andrew, satisfied with my work. "But how does this correlate with the disaster that the Solarians will have? The Turians have ship hulls around half as thick as ours, but that and their metallic carapace would only save them from dying from the radiation. Their Ezo cores would still destabilize. So what do you think happens to Solarian ships, which are not built for a straight-up fight, but with clandestine operations and maneuverability in mind? Their hulls would be too thin to hold off the rift radiation. With a pure DR drive, they would kill their crew, and with a mixed Ezo DR drive and EDR drive, the ship would explode. To use a DR drive, the hulls have to be made thicker, which would result in more mass and less speed, conflicting with the Solarian naval doctrine," concluded Andrew with a smile on his face. "At most, they would use it to colonize some out-of-the-way planets or a limited amount of stealth vessels. Still, that is something we can deal with in the future. But by far, the best thing is that they will keep the fact that they have a DR drive hidden from the other Council species. It will be an advantage for them, just like it is for us. The Solarians won't share it. The Asari have shown them up often enough with their technology, and we've already discussed the Turian issue. Still, that is all just talk. Right now, we must not let our guard down. All I've said could be wrong," I warned, and Andrew nodded, understanding my point. Our conversation was abruptly ended when thunderous applause filled the Parliament chambers. Looking at the podium, I understood what was going on. Michael had finally finished his speech, and the people stood on their feet applauding. "Looks like he nailed it again," I commented, and got a snort from Andrew in return. "Did you expect differently?" "No, not really," I confessed. "From now on, it's going to be busy for both of us. I already got my marching orders from Michael this morning. I have heard of them. Going to the Citadel again sounds like fun, but to negotiate trade deals and how to adapt our currency to the galactic credit, that's not my kind of fun," Andrew joked. He was right, it didn't sound like fun to me too, but somebody had to do it, and the fact that I got this job was a good sign. If I did well, that would only help me in the future when I decided that the time was right to throw my hat into the ring for the position of humanity's ambassador on the Citadel. Yet there were still a lot of things unattended on Earth and the colonies. Now that Michael was the president of the Systems Alliance, he could order to place ODPs into Earth's defense grid, something which didn't happen until now. While the ODPs could only fire with the power of a light cruiser at the moment, the needed power was too high for higher yields. They could still shoot as fast as a frigate. Moreover, simulations showed that should an ODP try to fire with the power of a dreadnought or even just a heavy cruiser, the force of the shot would destroy the ODP itself. That problem was still being worked on. In the end, that didn't stop us from building 40 of them and distributing 10 each to Reach, Terra Nova, and Shang-Chi, and the last 10 had been held back for Earth. "By the way," said Andrew, who was politely clapping for Michael's speech, "I have a list of people who would be assets to your R&D teams. At the top of the list is a Dr. Konstantin Shale, engineer, biologist, robotics expert, and a few more fields that fall into his range of expertise. All in all, one hell of a scientist." "Why are you giving this list to me?" I asked, confused. "I mean, I'm thankful for it, but why not recruit them for the Alliance Research Division?" It had been an agreement between the talent scouts of the Alliance and myself that each of us would look for new personnel on our own, not using the resources of the other. So I was confused why Andrew was giving me the list, clearly compiled with Alliance resources. "Because of those guys," Andrew said and gestured down to the members of the Parliament. "Politicians, pencil pushers, and their lot will have control over the Alliance's budget and how it is used. If a project seems to be too expensive, it's not going to be started at all or canceled midway through. You don't have that problem, and I know that the Alliance benefits a lot if you develop new tech and grow your companies. So take the list, and in exchange, you don't grab every university student that shows potential." I couldn't help but chuckle when Andrew said that. After all, it was true that I scouted the best graduates for my companies. With a smile, I gave him my agreement. If everything worked out as I had planned, I wouldn't need to anymore anyway. In a few years, the best and brightest students would come to the university I was planning to build on Terra Nova, a university that would become one of the most renowned in Alliance space, at first and later on in Citadel territory. Why search for talent if you can nurture it? With a short glance at my watch, I said to Andrew, "Send the list to my secretary. He will take care of recruiting them. I have to go now. Lots of things to do before I head to the Citadel." I held out my hand and Andrew clasped it without hesitation. "I wish you good luck and success in the coming negotiations." With the farewells done, I went towards the exit of the Parliament chambers, mentally going over several bits of information that could give me an advantage in the trade and currency negotiations. Yes, that could work if I got the right opponent, I muttered to myself, and I could see in the reflection of the elevator window how the ghost of a smile flashed over my lips.